Well, hello and welcome to the first video in my new Let's Play series for the game V for Victory, Utah Beach. Now in this series I'm going to be playing as the Allies through the campaign game. Now the campaign game starts on D+1, that is the day after D-Day, which is the 7th of June, and it runs through to the 2nd of July. Now as it says down here, as commander of the 7th Corps, your primary objectives are to link up with 5th Corps at Omaha Beach and take Cherbourg with all due haste. Your secondary objectives are to liberate captured French towns and inflict more casualties than you incur. We're an excellent defensive terrain, Commander, and the Nazis are dug in like Alabama ticks. You've got the Air Corps, the RAF, the US Navy and the Royal Navy to help you dig them out. There are a lot of good people counting on you. Make us proud. So, why does the game not start on D-Day, you may be thinking? Well, in the words of the game designers, the events of D-Day are inappropriate to include from the standpoint of the level of command represented by the players in Utah Beach. The officers on both sides at the levels represented by the players had essentially no real-time control over what happened on D-Day. Once the invasion machine was put into motion, there was very little that any of the mid or upper level commanders could do except read fragmentary reports and wait for the smoke to clear. Now, I'm going to be playing the game with all options at their historical settings. So, no Allied or Axis variants turned on, so they're all turned off as you just saw there. Air superiority is set to total Allied, and weather to historical. And also for greatest realism, I'll be playing with all of the realism options turned on. That is limited intelligence, 1 division per attack and fog of war. And for my opponent, I will be playing against the computer AI. Also note that I'm playing with the final version of the game, which was published in 1995 as the commemorative collection. Now this version was published by Intracorp, who at the time owned 360 Pacific. Now the game engine version is 4.01 and the Utah Beach scenarios are at version 3.1. So let's just kick off the game. Now when the game starts at 6 AM on the 7th of June, the units available, their placement and strengths, or looking at it the other way around, their casualties, are historically accurate, or at least as historically accurate as is possible when you're limited to representing only battalion and company sized units on a 1 km per hex grid. But how and why did these units get to these locations, and why are they in the condition that they are in? Some of them are under strength, in particular some of the airborne units. As I'm showing here, the 2nd Battalion of the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, this has if we go to the ops here, this has an unmodified strength of 2 out of a normal 7, which is staggeringly only 28% of full strength. And this is before disruption and fatigue reduce its fighting strength even further. Many other units also start the game with significant disruption and fatigue, the worst being the airborne units, with many having level 4 disruption and fatigue, reducing their combat strength by nearly 27%. But some of the 4th Division's ground units are also affected, but only to a maximum level of 2 disruption and fatigue, as I'm showing here for the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Infantry Regiment, and this reduces its combat strength by over 13%. Now, I asked myself these how and why questions when first starting the game, so I suspect that some of you may also like to know. And to answer these questions, I'm dedicating these first 2 videos to that purpose. Specifically, I'll focus on the planning and events for D-Day itself. This will hopefully set the scene for you and help you feel more connected to the units involved and immersed in the battle as it progresses. I'll also be reviewing the terrain and enemy forces involved, at least to the level that they were known to the D-Day planners. For this purpose, I will almost exclusively be quoting and referring to maps from the book Utah Beach to Cherbourg, which was part of the American Forces in Action series that was written and originally published by the Historical Division of the US War Department in 1948. Now this is to keep the basis for my Let's Play series as close as possible to what was known to the planners and commanders of the time. I want to keep the concept of limited intelligence and fog of war throughout this series, and as such I'm not going to refer to any later publications or to any publications that provide greater information about the enemy disposition than was known at the time. My plan for this Let's Play is to assign the same objectives to the same units as was the case in reality. Well, at least as much as is possible and reasonable to do so. I will review the D-Day objectives for these units later in this video. Now I'm curious to see how setting the same objectives plays out in the game and to see how well I do compared to history. As such, throughout this Let's Play, I will occasionally compare my progress against that achieved historically, again referring to the information and maps in the Utah Beach to Cherbourg book. So, with that out of the way, let's begin. The original plan for the 1944 invasion of the continent, known as the Overlord Plan, did not include an assault on the beaches of the East Cotentin Peninsula, largely because when the plan was written in the summer of 1943, it was believed that with the resources then allotted to the operation, it would be sounder to concentrate the landings over the beaches between Grand Combe and Cairn. As can be seen here, only 3 divisions and 3 landing beaches were assigned to the initial assault of the operation, along with 2 airborne divisions, 1 on either flank. However, it was recognised that a landing on the Cotentin Peninsula proper, on beaches northwest of the Cotentin estuary, would be highly desirable in order to ensure the early capture of the port of Cherbourg. Tactical planning had been dominated from the beginning by the need for adequate port capacity, on which the later build-up of forces in the lodgement area largely depended. Now, when General Dwight Eisenhower assumed supreme command for Overlord in January 1944, it seemed to him and his subordinate commanders that the Cotentin assault was not only desirable, but essential for the success of the invasion. Now, on a side note, it's interesting how the US-written Utah Beach to Cherbourg book completely fails to mention the fact that it was not only Eisenhower, but also Montgomery who identified together that the scope of the initial plans needed to be greatly increased to ensure success. In any case, additional resources were found and the original 3-division assault was increased to 5. The assault front was widened both eastward to include additional beaches in the British sector and westward to include the East Cotentin. Equally important, the provision of additional air transport made it possible to land 2 2/3 airborne divisions simultaneously. 2 of these airborne divisions were to land in the American sector to reduce the admitted risks of the west flank assault, where troops for some time after landing would be separated from the main body of Allied forces by the Cotentin estuary, and would attack in an area where the enemy had formidable defensive advantages. One of the factors which had dominated tactical planning was that the assault area itself did not include a port, which was so necessary for sustained operations. The first mission of the invasion force following the consolidation of a beachhead was therefore the capture of Cherbourg. This mission was assigned to 7th Corps, commanded by Major General J. Lawton Collins. The 7th Corps, together with 5th Corps, which was to land at Omaha Beach, were part of the 1st US Army under Lieutenant General Omar Bradley. On General Bradley's left flank was the 2nd British Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Miles Dempsey. The 2 armies together constituted the 21st Army Group under General Bernard Montgomery, who for the assault phase was the overall ground commander. The dominant terrain feature of the South Cotentin is the Douve River, which, together with its principal tributary, the Meurdere, drains the major portion of the peninsula, flows south and southeast, and then turns towards the sea. Neither river has high banks or is sufficiently wide to present insurmountable obstacles, but through much of their course these rivers flow through flat bottom lands and water meadows. A lock and dam at La Barquette, just north of Cotentin, controls the drainage of most of these bottomlands. At high tide, the low marshlands of the Douve and the Meurdere are below sea level, and by opening the lock, these lands can be converted into shallow lakes which, supplemented by the water meadows and undrained swampland of the prairies Mer Cargus to the south, effectively isolate the Cotentin, restricting all land traffic to established route through Cotentin and Pont-l'Abbé on the east, and to a narrow strip of land between Saint-Lô de Ville and Saint-Sauveur-de-Pierrepont on the west, and I do apologise for my atrocious pronunciations there. The blocking of these routes and the seizure of the La Barquette locks intact would permit the establishment of an easily defended military line to the south, protecting the rear and the west flank of forces pushing northward against Cherbourg. On the east coast of the Cotentin, a belt of low-lying meadowland from the mouth of the Douve to Quenneville had been subjected to shallow flooding. Now, this area of inundation running parallel to Utah Beach had been created by the obstruction of several stream exits about 50 yards to the rear of the beach, resulting in the flooding or complete saturation of the soil for a width of 1 to 2 miles. Travel in this area was restricted to a few causeways, which cleared the inundations by approximately 1 foot, but could easily be obstructed by blocks or demolitions. So in summary, critical areas of the Cotentin therefore were the Cotentin-La Barquette area, with its control of the water level in the low marshlands along the Douve and Murderay, which was the key point in the east for passage into or out of the peninsula. Secondly, the dry ground between Saint-Leu-de-Ville and Saint-Sauveur-de-Pierrepont, which controlled the western approaches to the peninsula. And lastly, the inundated area between the mouth of the Douve and Quenneville, which not only restricted the exploitation of an initial landing by canalising any advance from the beachhead, but also facilitated the enemy's defence of the area. The 7th Corps' original plan of attack was designed to gain immediate control of these critical areas. Briefly, it provided for an assault on Utah Beach by the 4th Division, with attached tanks and combat engineers. 2 side-by-side assault beaches were identified, named Terre Green to the north and Uncle Red to the south. The assault beach that each unit would land at, the landing time, exit route from the beach, and specific unit objectives were all carefully planned in advance, as can be seen here. The assault by the 4th Division was to be preceded by 2 pre-dawn airborne landings, one by the 101st Airborne Division, east and southeast of Sainte-Mère-Église, with the task of capturing the vital beach exits and blocking the eastern approaches to the peninsula from the south, and the other by the 82nd Airborne Division, west of Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte, with the mission of sealing the western approaches to the peninsula. However, this plan was later changed, with the 82nd being dropped much further east, and I'll discuss the reason for this in a short while. Man-made defences along the coast took many forms and varied considerably in size, type and layout. However, I will only be touching on those that are featured in the game. That is, the German strongpoints and static coastal artillery batteries. Now, the strongpoints along the coast are part of the larger Atlantic Wall fortifications, intended to defend Fortress Europe from an Allied amphibious invasion, and would serve as the initial barrier until larger mobile forces could be moved into position for a decisive counterattack. The network of strongpoints consisted of company-sized strongpoints called Stützpunkt, abbreviated as STP, and platoon-sized resistance points called Widerstandnest, abbreviated as WN or simply W. Now, Widerstandnest would generally have smaller caliber guns with light weapons such as machine guns and mortars. The Widerstandnest or strongpoint defences consisted of pillboxes, tank turrets mounted on concrete structures, Tobruk pits, firing trenches and underground shelters. They were usually connected by a network of trenches and protected by wire, mines and anti-tank ditches. Concrete infantry strongpoints provided interlocking fields of fire and were armed with both fixed and mobile artillery pieces. Now, on this game map I have attempted to overlay the locations of the Stützpunkt and Widerstandnest that were in operation on D+1. Now, since hexes in the game represent 1 kilometre, sometimes multiple Stützpunkt and Widerstandnest are contained in one hex, as you can see here. At the extreme lower end, there may only be one Widerstandnest in a hex. Now, the game has simplified both of these strongpoint types, regardless of how many there are in a hex, down to a standard bunker or beach bunker, with the same effect regardless of actual strongpoint type or count. I guess this was a necessary simplification for the game, but it does make our rate of progress up the coast likely to be somewhat different to reality. Located about 2 miles inland, a supporting network of Army and Navy static coastal artillery batteries had the twin function of attacking the Allied landing forces on the approach to the beach, as well as engaging them once on the shore. Now, these consisted of heavy and medium caliber guns housed in a series of concrete forts, and they were sited to cover both the sea approaches and the beach areas. The most formidable of these being at Crisbec and Saint-Martin-de-Vaudeville. The latter was found by the Allies on D-Day to have been abandoned due to the pre-invasion bombardment. However, the batteries at Crisbec and another at Aisville were greatly reinforced with local infantry, and they put up a tenacious defence, significantly delaying the advance of the Allies' 22nd Infantry Regiment. It wasn't until the 9th of June that Aisville was taken, with Crisbec holding out for another 2 days, earning the commander there the Knight's Cross. And it will be interesting to see how we progress against these coastal batteries in the game. The Cotentin Peninsula lay within the defensive zone of the German 7th Army, commanded by Colonel General Friedrich Dollmann. Now, Allied intelligence estimates between March and early May of 1944 placed the enemy force occupying the Cotentin at 2 infantry divisions, the 709th and the 243rd. Now, the 709th Division was known to have a large percentage of non-Germans, particularly Georgians, and was disposed generally along the east coast of the peninsula, with 2 of its regiments, the 729th and the 919th, believed to be manning the beach defences. The 243rd Division was located generally to the rear of the 709th, with a mission of defending the western portion of the peninsula. Now, the 716th and 352nd Divisions, disposed east and south of the Cotentin, were not believed capable of effecting the 7th Corps assault. However, intelligence reports early in May indicated that the enemy had been strengthening his coastal defence units to bring them up to the level of field divisions in strength and equipment. Formerly classified by Allied intelligence as static, these divisions had been upgraded to limited employment or low establishment. In addition to the organic field artillery of the infantry divisions, the enemy had various Army and Navy coast artillery and flak battalions, and the 709th Division was thought to have been strengthened by elements of the 17th Machine Gun Battalion at Cotentin. It was not believed early in May that the enemy had panzer battalions or reserves of regimental strength in the Cotentin. Now, about 10 days before D-Day, it was learned that enemy dispositions in the Cotentin had probably been altered as a result of the recent arrival of the 91st Division in the Cotentin Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte-Valognes area. Now, this division was estimated to consist of 2 or 3 regiments and 1 battalion of tanks. The 243rd Division was believed to have moved further west, while the 91st Division occupied positions to the rear of the 709th Division. The mission of the 91st was apparently to strengthen the defence of the eastern half of the peninsula from Cotentin to Valognes. These 3 divisions were part of the 84th Corps, which also controlled other divisions east of the Cotentin Peninsula. Now, the appearance of the 91st Division was a surprise, and it upset the 7th Corps' original plan of deployment, and as I mentioned earlier, it actually forced a change in the initial mission of the 82nd Airborne Division. The 7th Corps Plan of Operations was issued on the 27th of March 1944. One of its major objectives, derived from the tactical aspects of the Cotentin terrain, was the cutting of the entire peninsula at its base as a preliminary to the drive on Cherbourg. The original plan of deployment provided that the 101st Airborne Division would land southeast of Saint-Mère-Église, destroy the bridges in the vicinity of Cotentin, and seize the crossings over the Douve at Pont-l'Abbé and Beauzeville-la-Bastille, in order to protect the southern flank of the 7th Corps east of Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte. The 82nd Airborne Division was to land west of Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte and block the movement of enemy reinforcements into the Cotentin in the western half of the peninsula. However, this plan of deployment had to be revised when it became known towards the end of May that the Germans had moved the 91st Division into the Cotentin, The additional strength which the enemy now possessed greatly increased his capabilities. Not only was he now able to meet the beach landings in greater strength, but his possession of additional troops at Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte constituted a potentially serious threat to an airborne landing in this vicinity. It now became more important than ever for the seaborne elements to secure rapidly a beachhead sufficiently deep to hold against enemy counterattacks in force. Of equal importance was the need for a prompt drive to Cotentin to forestall the destruction of the locks in this area, to seal off the enemy's eastern approach to the beachhead, and to keep the Germans from driving a wedge into the initial gap between 7th and 5th Corps. General Collins learned of the changed enemy situation in the Cotentin on the 27th of May when he was called to General Bradley's headquarters in Bristol and was advised of the necessity of making some changes in the plans for the drop of the 2 airborne divisions. At this meeting, the 1st Army Staff proposed that both the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions be dropped east of the Murderay, the 101st south and east of St. Mary-Église, and the 82nd in the immediate vicinity of that town. After some study, General Collins suggested a less radical change, that the 82nd be dropped between the Murderay and the Douve, generally north of Pont-l'Abbé, and that the 101st plan remain unchanged. General Collins thought that the 82nd would thus be in a better position to seize not only the crossings of the Murderay at La Fière and Chef de Pont, but also the crossings of the Douve further west in the vicinity of Saint-Sauveur-le-Vicomte and Saint-Colombe. After additional study of the maps, however, it was concluded that because of the wooded and thickly hedged areas between the Murderay and the Douve, and the paucity of clearings large enough to take gliders, it would not be possible to drop the entire 82nd Division west of the Murderay. The final decision therefore provided for a divided drop astride the Murderay, with 1 parachute regiment dropping to the east and 2 parachute regiments to the west of the river. So that was the final plan. Well, that's it for part 1. In part 2, I'll review the objectives of each division and their battalions, their movements during D-Day, if their objectives were achieved, and why the units are in the condition and location they are at the start of the game. Well, thanks for watching, folks. Please let me know if you have any thoughts on this video in the comments section below. Also, please don't forget to like my videos and subscribe to my channel. That really helps me out. And if you're feeling adventurous, please check out my Patreon page. Recent changes to YouTube rules mean that I now make absolutely nothing from my videos. Patreon is now my only means of recouping the time and money I invest in making the content you're watching. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, folks. Take care. Bye bye.